Hey everybody, KMO here with another Out of My Head video, and in this one I'm going to talk about a book that I listened to on audiobook, just like the other three, but this one was difficult to get through, and I've listened to it twice now, well, almost twice, probably like, 1.8 times, something like that. Here's the deal. The book is a fairly well synthesized summary of how we came to the current state of affairs where arguably all or almost all significant AI development work in the entire world is being done by 9 companies, 6 of them in the United States, the so-called G Mafia, which is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, IBM, and Apple, and that's the G Mafia. And in China, the BAT, or Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And the book is best probably when it is talking about how the Chinese Communist Party responded to the event of the a computer program, AlphaGo, beating the world champion at the game of Go. That was a real Sputnik moment for China, and it caused the Chinese government to basically, it lit a fire under their butts and got them to propose a sweeping agenda for the development and deployment of artificial intelligence for the betterment of the Chinese people, aka the stability of the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party exercises its leverage over the big AI companies in China to basically get them working on a unified goal for the to promote the strategic interests of the country of China. Integral to this is not only developing AI, drawing the best teachers, university professors and such to China to basically brain drain from the West and bulk up the brain trust of the Chinese AI industry, but also in their Belt and Road Initiative and their cultural outreach programs, basically exporting their notions about the proper use of AI for social control to the countries that they have undue influence over, or maybe it's due influence, justified, rightful influence, depending on your point of view. The thing that made this book hard for me to read was, at every opportunity, the author, Amy Webb, would divert into a segue about just how horrible it is that there are so many white men working in the industry developing AI here in the United States. She goes back to this again and again and again, and she just keeps beating that horse long after it has stopped quivering and kicking. And the first time I listened to the book, to the audiobook, when she would get on that topic and just keep going on and on and on about it, I know that song. It's not a favorite of mine. It's not one that I hum along to. I don't tap my foot to that song. When I hear people singing it, my inclination is to say, Alexa, next chapter. Alexa, never mind.
This is the last chapter.
So my first time through the book, it was a bit shorter than the second time through, because every time she just got stuck in the mud, spinning her wheels on that, white men are awful routine, I just skipped ahead. On the second time through, though, I forced myself to listen to it, the whole thing, beginning to end. And I listened to all that stuff. It's just so annoying. But I'm not going to say anything more about that in this video. I'll have a whole other video where I talk about, there's the really obnoxious elements in this book. And there are some really extremely obnoxious elements that come up again and again. But the useful things, I think, were one, her story about the role of the Chinese Communist Party in coming up with a coherent and sort of unified vision for AI development and deployment in the service of a growing Chinese economy and the growing power of China as a global superpower. She covers that in admirable detail. And in fact, after I read this book, or listened to this book, I listened to AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee, which is supposed to be explicitly about China and the United States and the shifting balance of power as a result of China's success and rapid development of AI. And Amy Webb's coverage of the China scene is better than Kai-Fu Lee's. And I'll do, at least a couple videos on Kai-Fu Lee's book, so I won't go any further there. I'll just say that that is a definite strength of Amy Webb's book. But also useful, I think, is the terminology that she introduces. And it's kind of fun. So, the big nine are these big nine companies, 6 in the U.S., 3 in China. The 6 in the U.S. she calls the G Mafia. So G Mafia is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, IBM, and Apple. So just GMAFIA. And then the BAT in China is Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So that's fun terminology, and it's something I probably will come back to again and again. The previous terminology that G Mafia would replace for me would be the stacks. The stacks is what Bruce Sterling called companies like Amazon and Apple and Microsoft that tried to control all types of different businesses and sort of stack them one on top of each other, in these silos. So the G Mafia, you'll probably hear me refer to the G Mafia in the future. That might be the lasting contribution, at least to my thought, that comes from this book. But later in the book, she lays out 3 scenarios for the near future development of AI, both here and in China. And these 3 scenarios are the optimistic scenario, the most likely business as usual scenario, which she calls the pragmatic scenario, and then, the to be avoided scenario, or the dystopian scenario. And she said in interviews that she thinks we're probably on track to hit something somewhere between the pragmatic and the dystopian. And in describing these 3 possible futures, or these 3 scenarios to consider, she does so using the framework of right now we are in the implementation phase of ANI, or artificial narrow intelligence, but we are moving towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, and that eventually, if we let things go unchecked, we're coming up on ASI, artificial superintelligence, or the singularity. And in the optimistic scenario, we being everybody except China, come together to form a governing board, sort of an advisory organization to chart out and guide the development of AI in the West. And this organization, which she calls Gaia, which stands for, what was it? The Global Alliance on Intelligence Amplification. Is that it? No. The Global Alliance on Intelligence Augmentation. That this body would prevent the emergence of ASI, because ASI would be uncontrollable and dangerous and just a total, table toppler in terms of how it's going to affect the game that is in progress. And so in the optimistic scenario, basically everybody but China, does create this organization called Gaia, which basically orients artificial intelligence toward a path that is consistent with human dignity, human rights, something approaching equality. Amy Webb is no champion for equality, let me tell you this, and she is certainly no critic of capitalism. I'll talk about that in the next video. But in this optimistic scenario, Gaia basically produces not only a sort of humane approach to AI, but also one that is competitively viable, to go up against China. And basically the whole world encircles China, and eventually China relents, it gives up its totalitarian tendencies and joins Gaia. And everybody lives happily ever after. We get all the benefits of AI, none of the drawbacks, and for whatever reason, problems that she considers in the pragmatic scenario, like the emergence of ill-advised transhumanism, genetic chimeras, that sort of thing, augmented intelligence, heritable traits that are instilled via genetic engineering, autonomous weapon systems, AI in the military. I mean, there's all manner of areas of concern which, just for whatever reason, she doesn't think need to be addressed in the optimistic scenario. So the pragmatic scenario is the one that is really the most fully developed, and that is where she does go into all of these other different problems and admits that they will be problems. And then in the dystopian scenario, basically, this one's really actually pretty funny, because it's dystopian in a way that you can easily imagine being described in a satirical film, like what was that Mike Judge film about the future, Idiocracy. Before I talk about that, though, I should introduce one other piece of nomenclature that she introduces, and that is the PDR, or personal digital record. Each of us right now, we have bits of personally identifiable information. Could be your address, your social security number, your face, your fingerprints, your iris pattern, your genome. All of these things are unique to you. Well, maybe not your address. You might not necessarily live alone, but your email address. I mean, things that are unique to you. These PII, or these pieces of personally identifiable information, can be used to basically de-anonymize anonymized data collection. So you might fill out some form, or you might provide some data, or you might provide permission for an app to basically monitor you and collect data on you, with the understanding that it won't be associated with you individually. And it might not be by the person or the organization to whom you're giving permission, but other organizations, when they get a hold of the data, can then go out and find the PIIs, or the personally identifiable pieces of information, which they can then use to link the anonymized information to you, thus de-anonymizing it. Well, she says in the future that's all going to collapse into the PDR, the personal digital record, which is understood by everybody, is definitely linked to you as an individual. So it's going to be, your credit history, your medical history, your criminal history if you have any, your social networks as mapped out by your participation in social media, and your email and your phone calls and your text messages and all that. All of this is going to go into one record. And in the dystopic scenario, your record, your PDI, is going to be formatted to be compatible with one of the big tech giants or another, but there won't be interoperability between the various platforms. So households are going to get stuck into being Amazon households or Google households or Apple households. And she says that, Apple households are going to be older and wealthier and more upscale. Amazon is going to be for poor people. Amazon will actually build housing and administer housing for, basically people who are on public assistance. And they will have absolutely no possibility of getting out of the Amazon ecosystem. And then in the Google PDR ecosystem, you're going to have three different layers. You're going to have a top layer. It's going to be your green layer, where people, if you call for a car, it gets there quickly. It's got your choice of music on already. The air conditioning is set to your preferred level. It's a nice car. There's no advertising en route. Then the middle tier, I think, was blue. Your car doesn't get there as quickly. It's not quite as nice. You have to listen to a bit of advertising at the beginning of the journey, but then you get to listen to whatever you want. And then the yellow, the people basically at the bottom of the Google ecosystem, they get the smelly car that somebody barfed in, and it's late, and there's advertising the whole way. I mean, basically, if you're Google Yellow, there's advertising everywhere. In the future, these will be augmented reality devices, and they'll be broadcasting advertising at you 24/7 if you're Google Yellow, or possibly Amazon. And while a lot of people choose the Google ecosystem because they realize that it is much easier to graduate from Google Yellow up to blue up to green than it is to move out of the ghetto of the Amazon ecosystem into the upscale Apple ecosystem. So this is the fun stuff, really, in her strategic forecasting. It's very fanciful but fun. It's sort of satirical. It sort of reads like a social satire. But then it ends, and spoiler alert, I mean, it's not a novel, but, it's a narrative, so spoiler alert, it ends with the Chinese, an ASI, an artificial superintelligence in China, basically takes control over the ingested nanobots that we all have in our bodies and kills everybody who's not Chinese or not a citizen of a China-related country, a China bloc country. And that's just to relieve the burden of overpopulation on the planet and to acquire more resources for China. So basically everybody in the U.S. gets sick and dies because Chinese ASI has hacked our nanobots. That's how that scenario ends. So this is the fun stuff about the book that I think I will remember fondly. And with all of these so-called book reviews, I'm not offering you information upon which I expect you to decide to read or not read, listen or not listen to any of these books. I assume most of the people watching these videos won't read or listen to any of these books. So what I'm mostly wanting to do is relate to you the useful information that I took from them. Or in this instance, the amusing information that I took from them. So Amy Webb's up to some chicanery in this book as well. There's definitely some virtue or coalition signaling going on, and a lot of places where, just casual in passing mentions of things really set off my bullshit detector and made me not trust the author's intentions. And I'll talk about that in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.